Africa is literally being torn apart. The continent, home to 1.5 billion people, is cracking. The ground is rupturing, and smoke is rising from deep fissures. In September 2005, something incredible happened in the Afar Desert on the border between Ethiopia and Eritrea. In just 1 week, there were more than 100 earthquakes. The ground erupted tens of kilometers in length and up to 8 meters in width. Smoke rose from the fissures, and in some places, temperatures reached nearly 100 degrees Celsius as magma rose to the surface. Then the Dabahu volcano erupted, spewing lava from deep within the earth. Locals reported that the ground shook beneath their feet for weeks. Livestock refused to drink water from the wells because it was hot and smelled sulfurous. People fled, abandoning their homes and animals. Streets collapsed, and entire swaths of land sank below sea level. In the village of Gabo, the entire town center disappeared underground in a single night. Geologists quickly realized that this was not natural tectonic activity. It was the beginning of full-scale continental drift. Satellite images showed that the rift was growing at a record speed, much faster than any similar process occurring anywhere else on Earth. It turned out that Africa was splitting in two. The Somali plate was moving east, and the Nubian plate was moving west. Between them, magma was rising from the Earth's interior, creating immense pressure that was tearing the continent apart. Huge cracks had already formed, the depth of a multi-story building and the width of a multi-lane highway. In a few million years, a new ocean would emerge here, connecting to the Red Sea. But the catastrophe had already begun. Since 2005, dozens of large new cracks have been recorded in the region. In the town of Arta in Djibouti, a crack split the main street in two, splitting the town. In Kenya, a section of a major highway collapsed so deeply that its bed is no longer visible, leaving a massive valley the width of a football field. Throughout the region, houses are cracking from their foundations to their roofs. The railway line between Addis Ababa and Djibouti is repeatedly damaged by landslides. Millions of people now live on the edge of a massive rift that widens year after year. Around Lake Assal, the water level has dropped several meters in recent years as the lake bed sinks with the tectonic plate. We are witnessing what normally takes millions of years, the formation of a new ocean in real time. Geologists have discovered that the rate of plate divergence here is hundreds of times faster than the average in other rift zones around the world. This is not a distant geological process in the heart of the Sahara. These fissures extend beneath cities, tearing up roads and destroying homes. People wake up in shock to find their streets split by a massive fault line. Entire neighborhoods are rendered uninhabitable. Millions of people in the region are already considering moving elsewhere, and mass migration is inevitable in the coming years. Yet while it will take millions of years for a new ocean to form in Africa, existing oceans are already expanding, and we will see the consequences in our lifetimes. All over the world, water levels are slowly but steadily rising. Every minute, Greenland and Antarctica are losing millions of tons of ice. In the past 20 years, the rate of melting has doubled, and in some areas, tripled. Antarctica's Thwaites Glacier, the size of a U.S. state, is losing tens of billions of tons of ice every year, and the melting is accelerating with each passing year. Since the end of the 19th century, global sea levels have already risen by nearly 1/4 of a meter, and half of that rise has occurred in the past 25 years alone. The process is accelerating. What was once almost invisible, it can be seen with the naked eye today. In Miami, streets flood even on sunny days, as rising sea levels push groundwater to the surface. The city spends hundreds of millions of dollars each year on pumping stations and upgrading sewage systems. In Jakarta, entire neighborhoods are sinking faster than the sea level rises. This megalopolis is doomed. By 2050, it will be completely submerged. Venice is now affected by flooding more than half the days of the year. A massive system of mobile seawalls, which took 20 years to build and cost billions of euros, is now in use almost daily. In Norfolk, the largest U.S. naval base in the world, the harbor floods 10 times a year during regular high tides. Just a few decades ago, this was seen only in disaster movies. Today, it's everyday life for coastal cities. By mid-century, more than 800 million people in hundreds of cities will be at risk of flooding. If the sea level rises just 1 meter, parts of New York will disappear, and the entire lower Manhattan will be underwater. London will lose entire neighborhoods along the Thames, including its financial district. Shanghai will lose its airport and half of its downtown area. Mumbai will lose its historic center and financial district. If the sea level rises by 2 meters, the Nile Delta, home to millions of Egyptians, will be completely submerged. That's a third of Egypt's population. Bangladesh, home to hundreds of millions of people, will lose much of its arable land. In Vietnam, the Mekong Delta, which feeds millions and produces half the country's rice, will be submerged. Island nations like Tuvalu, Kiribati, and the Maldives are already preparing for large-scale evacuations. Tuvalu is buying land in New Zealand to relocate all of its citizens. Kiribati has bought land in Fiji. The Maldives, where most of the land is located, less than a meter above sea level. You build floating cities and artificial islands, but eventually the sea will swallow everything. Entire countries will disappear. This isn't science fiction. NASA tracks sea level rise from space, and the grim numbers are rising faster than ever predicted. Scientists are constantly updating their estimates, and each time the forecasts get worse. By the end of the century, the sea level may not rise by half a meter, but several times that. But even rising waters are a relatively slow-moving threat. There are forces that can change our entire world in a single day. Not from space, but from deep within the earth. Beneath the beautiful valleys of Yellowstone National Park lies the most powerful bomb on Earth, a supervolcano with a magma chamber larger than a major city. The amount of magma inside is so vast that it could cover the entire United States in lava. The last eruption occurred more than 500,000 years ago. Back then, ash covered half the continent, and the animals that survived walked on the ash as if it were snow. By comparison, the famous eruption of Mount Vesuvius looks like a firework next to it. Now geologists are recording disturbing signs. The ground in the park is literally bulging. This means the magma chamber is expanding and the pressure is rising. The number of earthquakes has increased dramatically. The ground is shaking almost constantly. Geothermal springs are getting hotter, and some geysers have changed their behavior. The famous Old Faithful now erupts later than usual. In recent years, swarms of earthquakes have been recorded, thousands of earthquakes in just a few weeks. Temperatures in some springs have reached record levels. The U.S. Geological Survey has installed more than 150 seismometers and is constantly monitoring even the smallest changes. If Yellowstone erupts, the effects will be felt across the planet. It would be catastrophic. Everyone living within 100 kilometers would die instantly from toxic gases and molten lava. Cities like Salt Lake City, Denver, and Bozeman would disappear from the map. Layers of ash up to 3 meters thick would cover the land from California to New York, and even the East Coast would be covered in a thick layer. All agricultural activity within a 1,000-kilometer radius would cease completely. The ash would render the soil unsuitable for farming for decades. Most crops in the USA would be destroyed within a week, and livestock farming would collapse due to poisoned feed. The transportation system would collapse. Airports would close, cars would be immobilized by the abrasive ash, and railway lines would be cut off. The ash would rise 30 kilometers into the stratosphere, blocking sunlight. Global temperatures would drop several degrees for years, in some regions by as much as 10 degrees. global famine would break out. Even in countries not directly affected by the ash, crop yields could drop by 90%. The world would lose its largest food supplier. The United States exports nearly half of the world's grain, a third of its soybeans, and a quarter of its beef. Food prices would skyrocket, and billions would go hungry. Economic losses would reach tens of trillions of dollars, and global trade would be halted for months. Historical data shows that such eruptions occur every few 100,000 years. Scientists cannot accurately predict when the next one will occur, perhaps in 1,000 years, or perhaps tomorrow. The probability of a volcanic eruption in any given year is not very high, but it is always present. However, there is a more serious threat on Earth, one that makes no sound or smoke and simply melts, releasing material. It has been trapped underground for thousands of years. In Siberia, Alaska, and northern Canada, permafrost, a layer of frozen ground formed over tens of thousands of years, has begun to thaw. Beneath it lie trillions of tons of methane and carbon dioxide, trapped for thousands of years. Scientists say the amount of carbon in permafrost is twice the total amount of carbon in the atmosphere. Arctic temperatures are rising twice as fast as the global average, by 3 degrees Celsius over the past 50 years, compared to 1 degree Celsius globally. As a result, permafrost is thawing up to 3 meters deep, exposing organic matter, which begins to rot and release dangerous gases. Giant craters have recently appeared in the Siberian tundra due to underground methane explosions. The first, found on the Yamal Peninsula, was a massive hole big enough to fit a house inside. Since then, several more craters of similar size have been discovered. The explosions occur when methane accumulates beneath the permafrost, building up pressure until it breaks through to the surface. In lakes in northern Canada and Alaska, water bubbles form due to escaping gases, and due to low oxygen levels, fish die in large numbers. Scientists have recorded places where methane concentrations are 1,000 times higher than normal. In Alaska, some villages are being submerged. In one town, nearly every home has been damaged by melting ice. Methane warms the planet far more than carbon dioxide, especially in the first few years after entering the air. Today, thawing permafrost releases millions of tons of methane annually, roughly equivalent to the production of all the world's rice fields. And the amount increases every year. The more permafrost thaws, the more methane is released. The more methane is released, the higher the temperature. The higher the temperature, the faster. Permafrost. It's an irreversible cycle. Scientists call this cycle the point of no return. Computer models show that with a 5 degrees C rise in global temperature, widespread thawing will begin, and at 2 degrees C, the process will become unstoppable. Once this process begins, global warming will continue on its own, even if humans completely halt all emissions. The additional gases released by thawing permafrost could cause global temperatures to rise by several degrees. In the coming decades, a hothouse Earth scenario could develop, in which temperatures rise by nearly 10 degrees C in a short period of time, and much of the planet becomes uninhabitable. With such warming, food production could halve, deserts could expand exponentially, glaciers could disappear entirely, and sea levels could rise tens of meters. 2/3 of the world's population would live in areas where life would be impossible without air conditioning. This process has already begun. We are close to the point of no return. In recent decades, the area covered by permafrost has shrunk by millions of square kilometers, more than the area of the world's largest countries. Permafrost is no longer permanent. However, as our planet warms, the main climate engine begins to fail, and when it stops, the climate will change not over centuries, but within a few years. An invisible engine is at work in the Atlantic Ocean, warming Europe and stabilizing our planet's climate. It's a system of currents scientists call the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Circulation. The most famous part of it is the Gulf Stream. It moves millions of cubic meters of water every second, many times the combined volume of all the world's rivers. The warm water flows north toward Europe, releasing heat equivalent to 1 million nuclear power plants. Cold water sinks 3 kilometers and flows back south. This cycle has been operating for millions of years, keeping Europe several degrees warmer than it should be at this latitude. But now it's weakening. In recent decades, the current has slowed significantly, the biggest change in over 1,000 years. In recent years, the Gulf Stream has become weaker than ever, with its speed falling to historic lows. This is due to the melting of Greenland's glaciers, which release hundreds of billions of tons of fresh water into the ocean every year. Fresh water is lighter than salt water. It doesn't sink and disrupt circulation. Rainfall has also increased in the North Atlantic, further diluting the ocean's salinity. Recent studies are alarming. The system is on the verge of collapse. Scientists say the AMOC could stop sometime between 2025 and 2095, with the most likely time frame being around the middle of this century. Almost all models predict a complete cessation before 2100. If the AMOC were to cease, the global consequences would unfold within just 10 to 20 years. Europe would cool by 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, and in some regions by as much as 15 degrees Celsius. London's climate would be similar to that of northern Canada, with winter temperatures dropping to 15 degrees Celsius. Scandinavia would become uninhabitable. Agriculture in the UK, France, and Germany would become virtually impossible. Rainfall in Europe would be halved, leading to droughts. Monsoons would disappear in India and West Africa, and 1 billion people would lose their primary source of agricultural water. In India, rice yields would fall by nearly 50%. In West Africa, grain production would fall by 2/3. Sea levels on the U.S. East Coast would rise due to changes in the hydrological cycle. It will increase more than the global average. Atlantic hurricanes will become stronger and more frequent. Without the cooling influence of the Gulf Stream, ocean temperatures will rise and storms will gain power. The Amazon rainforest will lose much of its rain, dry up, and turn into savanna, releasing tens of billions of tons of carbon into the air, equivalent to the amount emitted by all the world's industries in several years. The sea ice around Antarctica will melt faster due to warm water flowing in from the north. Our world is accustomed to slow climate changes, but the failure of the Gulf Stream could completely alter our planet's climate in just a decade. Economic losses would reach hundreds of trillions of dollars, and hundreds of millions of people would become climate refugees. The Earth has always been alive, breathing through volcanoes, shifting continents, and altering its climate. But these changes have happened slowly, over millions of years of geological time. In just 100 years, we have delivered a massive shock to the planet. We've pumped massive amounts of carbon into the air, warming it, melting ancient ice, and changing the chemistry of the oceans. Our interference has created an explosive mix, and now Earth is doing what it has always done, but hundreds of times faster and more powerfully. Glaciers are disappearing in years instead of millennia. Permafrost is melting and bursting into giant craters. Ocean currents that have operated for millions of years are collapsing in decades. Temperatures are rising so fast that ecosystems can't keep up. The climate is no longer changing slowly. It's changing in violent leaps. We've woken the planet up and kicked it into overdrive. And now we can only watch in fear as our actions and the forces of nature combine into one destructive, unstoppable wave. It has already begun, and there is no going back.